Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
Danny, what's up, brother?
How you doing, my brother? Good to be
Good.
here.
I'm glad we could chat virtually. I was hoping to be able to make it out to LA, but I couldn't catch you before your move, so I'll have to wait a year.
We'll do a proper one. You don't have to
Yeah.
wait a year. I'll be back here quite a bit.
Oh, cool. Nice. Where are you moving to, by the way?
We're gonna spend some time in close to Nashville, and then we'll go to Florida for a few months, and then we'll be back.
Cool. Nice,
Yeah.
man. Well, I've been enjoying listening to you speak. You're pretty new to me, actually, in the last month, I guess. I discovered a quick trailer for the movie that is being made about what you've discovered. I don't know if it's a movie or if it's a series, but that trailer was cool. And then it led me to listening to a couple podcasts, the Danny Jones podcast, and I'm very intrigued. And I know a lot of people are very intrigued. And then I heard a little clip of Rick Straussman, and I was surprised to hear that he and you had not been in contact because of what you've discovered with DMT and this laser. And we're going to get into all this, but I was sort of shocked about that. So let's begin. Let's chat about some of this stuff, the DMT and lasers, and how the heck you discovered this. I have no idea where this began.
I mean, I don't know if we'll be able to cover the full story because it's a span over 6 years. And every time I try to approach it in some details, it's something is always lacking. So I think the best way to explore it is maybe more specifically, some specific details. But the reason we're making a documentary about it is because it was a long process. It wasn't like I had an idea and it was quite a lot of back and forth with intuition, knowledge, and my life's experiences. So that's what the movie is really going to be about. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to outline the whole thing, but in a nutshell, I basically wanted to answer the question whether there's a decisive way to determine whether what we see in the DMT space is what we would call a hallucination or what we would call real. That was really the thing that started me on the quest. And I figured out a way to answer that question conclusively. That's the gist of the whole story.
Yeah. And what is the way to conclusively find that truth out? I mean, I know you've tested it on hundreds of people, but what is your experiment going to look like now, the one that's going to be done or is being done?
You talking about the one with the magnet? Or which one are you talking about?
No, I don't actually know the magnet. I've only seen and heard of the laser, and then you have people get under the influence of DMT and they're staring at the code, but it's obviously for any outsider looking in, you're going, okay, these people knew about it, even though you're saying they didn't. But if you're going to actually go through a scientific exploration of is this real? Is it a hallucination, or is it actually happening to every person and they're all coming back with this exact same understanding? What does it look like? A double blind? I mean, do you have something set up where you can determine this?
So we have, I guess the short and the most straightforward way to answer your question is the aim is to try and influence the code in some way. So I am personally not that interested in the whole route that neuroscience might want to take. To me, it's a waste of time. When I said I wanted to answer the question, it wasn't to prove to humanity, it was to answer the question for me personally. Now, this is obviously a separate conversation, but that was my intent and goal because I have a particular relationship with what I guess we would call the truth, or in general, my epistemological scruples are pretty well dialed in. And this is something that some scientists might disagree with, but it's precisely because I know that relationship with my way of coming at truth claims that I know that if something graduates in my mind to what we would call knowledge, it's as solid as it's going to be. Now, that's simply because of the way that my brain works. Like it takes me years to get to like any kind of conclusion of any kind, and then I still linger on it for a few more years to see if it kind of holds water, and only then it kind of gets to this place of like I can say I know, right? It's only when I reach that stage is when I started talking about it publicly. So when I was absolutely certain. And because that's a separate trajectory from then trying to communicate it to the world, there's a lot of misunderstandings arise there, and I want to maybe create this distinction so people understand that when I say I know, it means I know. It doesn't mean I expect anybody else to accept it. And it's also why my attempt is not to convince anybody. I'm just making information available. I'm big on whatever true is true, regardless to what you want it to be. And I know that nowadays this is not a very popular idea for some reason. But yeah, I newsflash for people: reality is still a thing, regardless to what you think. So coming to it from that perspective, I have conclusively surmised for myself that there is no better explanation. Well, it's not. It's not really. It's not like I'm looking at an object and I'm trying to like, what is it? Oh, I know. That makes the most sense. No, like since I basically discovered this, I had a channel open for me with, for lack of a better term, with what you would call the simulators, like the civilization actually simulating our space. And it was expressed to me directly and shown to me. They show me the ropes. Like they show me exactly how they do it. There's no question about it. It's not a maybe. I know for sure. That, just like I say in the trailer. That kind of rhetoric, with the amount of certainty that I'm exhibiting right now, rubs people the wrong way. Very often, it's very. It makes people uncomfortable. It's kind of funny because notice that in nothing that I said, I've asked anybody to accept what I'm saying. But still, people kind of like feel that like, what, why are you saying it with so much confidence? Well, that's my prerogative. Like I can do whatever I want, right? So then it's time will tell if I was right or wrong, and that's okay. That's on me. And I want to, and I'm purposefully, I guess, making this very clear cut line here because I want everybody to understand that it has nothing to do with hubris or ego or any of that stuff. It's just there's certain things in life that when we reach certain conclusions in certain ways, we know certain things. As Zoltan said in the last conversation we just recorded with Danny Jones, the second one, he said, you got to drop an anchor somewhere. That's where I dropped my anchor. So that we set this aside, right? So for me, I know. Now the second part, which pertains to the question you actually asked me, which is, what do you intend to do in order to substantiate this for other people, like actually prove it to other people? Like I kind of alluded to a second ago, I'm not that interested in proving anything to anyone. I want to run some tests to it to see what we can substantiate in terms of what we call reality, right? Because it's almost like I have the answer in terms, not the answer. I have the answer of whether or not this is like a real space, so I know for a fact it is. So now I just have to find a way to substantiate this and connect it to everything else we understand about the world. So it's almost like reverse engineering. Because of that, to me, spending 5, 6, 7 years running, long tests with many, many individuals where they're going to try and see the code. Can we agree that they see the same code? I already know the answer to that. I don't need them to do that, right? So I'm trying to go about it from the physics perspective, which is what can we say about the code in terms of what we understand about the physical world that can hold water in the same way that our theoretical frameworks do when we're talking about what happens in the Large Hadron Collider. Okay, that's what I'm interested in. Now, again, this is where the conversation has a lot of pressure from all directions. Some people would say, well, this is premature. It's premature for anybody who wants to steal the question to be substantiated whether this is real or not. Yes, I understand that part. It's just not where I am. So I know that some people showed interest in putting it through particular, double blinds and all that stuff, and they should do that. That's very important. If I'm asked a question, I will be fully focusing on the former. What is the way to connect it to something physical? We were trying recently to do an experiment with magnets that showed some promise in terms of the code seems to be influenced by the magnet in some form. To be honest, it seems like it actually didn't really work. So it seems to be bunk, like it doesn't really work. Great, back to the drawing board. What else can we test? That's really how it needs to be approached. And But what I would say, to maybe extend an olive branch to all the individuals that believe that everything we so far perceived about the world was wrong, and nothing is physical, and therefore we have to throw away, analytical science to the sideway. It is true that the world is much larger from an ontological perspective, and also from an what is possible for humans to be a part of, than so far been presumed by modern science. That is true. However, it will never replace everything we understand. It would have to connect to everything else that we understand. And I think this central line is the one that I'm trying to take constantly. In other words, if we're talking about the process that I think you were alluding to somewhat, and correct me if I'm wrong, in our interactions, which is, it seems like you are aware that this thing happening, which I guess we can call the awakening, right, where people wake up to like this new abilities and new attitudes, and all of that is absolutely true. It is part of the natural state of affairs. It is not some kind of a supernatural thing. It's supernatural. It's like it's natural on a super level where we don't quite understand it yet. And that's where I'm interested to take this. I want to play the bridge part between what I guess you would call the more scientific way of looking at the world and the more spiritual way of looking at the world, because they are essentially doing the same thing in terms of answering the question, what is going on?
Mm-hmm.
It's just that they choose to go about it in a different way. Science is interested in measuring things in third person and deciding things about them as a separate entity. And the spiritual pursuit, I see it as the science of the internal component of experience itself. So, like, how can you actuate whatever in fact is true? If I know that humans are beings that are capable of all these extra things, how do I in fact bring about these changes in myself and therefore through myself into the world? It's much more of a, I see it as a much more holistic uh, way of approaching things, and I actually tend to gravitate more towards that, because I see that it's, I guess that's the wisdom component that has to be there. But I'm also sensitive to the fact that the majority of what we would call the regular world, most people operate, most countries, let's say, most things that move the dial operate under the assumptions that the world is physical and it's doing what it's doing, and we need to be able to we need to speak a kind of language that would not alienate the majority of people and entities that are actually making changes in the world. So
Mm.
that's what I'm interested in. The short answer, just to dial it into something that is central line and not like to be all scattered. Yes, there are many conversations about how to do double blinds in terms of the laser, but I'm personally not going to be focusing on that. People can do that if they want. I want to see if
Mm-hmm.
I can tease apart something that is actionable, because I always say, look, if I can figure something out right now, I'm not saying I did, but let's say, just to give an extreme example, if I figure something out that allows me to levitate objects in the air, I need to do a lot less explaining in terms of whether it's real or not. I need to do other kinds of explaining, which is how do we do this, right? And I think that gives it much more merit than running a 10-year test on how many people agree on what they see.
Mm. Yeah, I'm getting curious about your epistemology and just your basic relationship to life and consciousness. Obviously, you seem like you've spent plenty of time like a psychonaut, but you have this existentialist view. It seems to stem from Gnosticism or Hermeticism, if you've read or gotten into both of those, but this like gnosis, this inner knowledge. And when I've studied a little bit of those realms, and I've even had my own subjective experiences, which I've had plenty. Um, it's obvious that when you're in those types of states, I mean, McKenna's talked about it too, and different philosophers, but it's like trust your experience, right? Trust yourself. And
Mhm.
that seems to be what's thrown out in this Western movement or this cultural, technological, and just the way that we use language and have shaped our whole societies is that we've really honed in on the material reductionist models of reality. And we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to our so called spiritual, mystical inner worlds.
Mhm.
And, when you start to get into these states, I have, and you have, and a lot of people that are drawn to your work, it's so obvious that they're just as real as you and I talking through this weird screen that we could take as normal. We've just
Mhm.
considered this to be normal because it's what we've accumulated through our little short ego life. But man, even the fact that you and I are able to do what we're doing now is psychedelic and is so beyond what we could wrap our head around. It's so mystical and magical, but we take it as normal. So when someone like you comes along and you've discovered this weird component where you're somewhat seeing beyond the veil of like a fabric of reality and you're seeing this code, you're like, I want to see if my girlfriend can do it. I want to see if my friends can do it. Let's test it on my friends first just to make sure I'm not a complete schizophrenic, which I remember you sort of saying you were. And I liked that because that's where you should start, is like, man, maybe I'm actually just destabilizing my own operating system and I should be careful here not to go tell the world or they'll lock me up. So I'm just realizing that when you try to bring forth to the hive these concepts that are beautiful and interesting, it's always rejected. That's what all of technological progress is. It's always been rejected. And especially when you're starting to really hone in on the truth, the so-called Gnostic self-truth. It's like, no, 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 we've got the truth over here. So anyway, I just think that's interesting, and I'm curious where you even started to begin your belief systems about the world. Where did you grow up religious? I know your dad was a scientist, so you probably didn't have any religious indoctrination. Let's start with a little bit of your breakdown of your consciousness.
So first of all, I think you nailed it. That was a really good summation of that. Gnosis is really what is operating at the core of this. One word before I answer your current question is I do think that that's just a. It's not even a Western thing. It's just a human thing. People do this on both sides of the spectrum. By the way, they like people really love exaggerating. That's their favorite thing. So and the Eastern traditions are not out of the woodwork with that. So it's like everything is a relationship of some sort, right? So the truth is somewhere, maybe not in the middle, but it's somewhere in the consensus of everything that presses against everything else. That's just the nature of things, from the laws of physics to conscious interaction, all of it, right? And I think that's pretty clear. And I don't know where somebody sits if it's not clear to them, right? So now, because of that, it's I would place my bets trying to find maybe not the point, but at least the wiggle room where these actual margins are. That's where I'm operating. And inside of it, you can call something knowledge, right? Now, knowledge is not it's still a temporary island and there's a horizon to it, right? There's just like everything else. But in the end of the day, you don't need to pretend you don't know what you do know, and which is a thing that now the people trying to again push toward against the Western perception of like, well, we know these things. People love exaggerating and saying, no, we know nothing. Well, it's not true either. Of course, we know some things, right? So I'm constantly trying to find that middle line, but I am trusting myself what I do know when I achieved this gnosis. If you just want to say, we create our own reality and we can do whatever. Okay, walk through a wall. Oh, you can't? How come? I thought you create your own reality. Well, it's you co-creating reality, sure, but don't forget that there's a co-creator with you, which is the rest of the world, right? That is constantly being thrown away. Shouldn't be thrown away. On the other side, which is the more obvious one to us, which is the mistake that scientists make, which is like, well, if I can't measure it, it's not real. Well, no, not true at all. Like you've never seen an atom in your life. That's a deductive system and reasoning that you have, which are all conceptual frameworks that you have, and they're actually abstractions. You've never seen one. You'll never seen one. It's probably not what you think it is, right? The
Mm-hmm.
actual thing. So that's where I'm operating. That's my attitude. This is why it's also now that I'm speaking more and more publicly, I realize this is confusing to a lot of people because people
Mm-hmm.
like to belong in a camp. They say, "What ism are you?" None of them.
Yeah.
This is what I'm seeing in front of me right now. Um, so to answer your question about my psychology, my grandfather was a physicist. Um, I think that my main operative was predominantly science. I was very influenced by physics. I started getting into physics very early on. I was in kind of trajectory of getting my bachelor's degree early on. Then I made some other life choices, and I and I really didn't pursue that career. But when I started doing what I was doing, traveling the world, I the, the the logical analytical side is the most. If we have an archetype, that would be like I'm a scientist as an archetype. Like that's just how my brain works, right? But part of that, what became clear to me when I started pursuing more of the contemplative trajectories, I realized that, oh, this is science. This is, meditative practices, not the ones that you do 10 minutes a day with an app, but proper meditation, proper. Like when you go and do Vipassana retreats or any other kind of thing you devote yourself to, that's science. It's the act of observing something closely, making rational decisions according to what it shows you to be doing or not doing, and then what can you repeat or not repeat, inculcate it into a framework that you can teach and you can repeat. That is science, right? Just of the inner world. And to me, it became clear that these definitions we currently have in the world, they're very incomplete and rudimentary, which of course we know, but it became so salient to me. It's like, it's not, it's silly. Like if you think that you, again, like we said, the only thing you can measure is real, well then you truly confuse the map with the territory, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, science, what it really is, if you look at the archetype of what science is in the extent of infinity, it is the enterprise of understanding. In our case, the enterprise of human understanding. Full stop. I always say that. It's just what it is. The modality doesn't really matter because the modality is only targeting a particular uh, attempt at doing something. If we want to build devices, well, it would make sense to come at the understanding through tools that allows us to measure the environment we're in, so it helps us understand what would or not happen more often than not. Same goes for the inner side. So now how do we connect all of those? What is the connection between these things? That's the thing that I'm interested in. I'm My grandmother was, I guess, a Christian, and but she wasn't really. It wasn't very pronounced in like a. She wasn't like an evangelical Christian. She wasn't like pushing it on people, right? So it was more of like a spiritual Christian. I grew up in Israel for many years, so I obviously exposed to Judaism and the way that that way of the world works, and it's only really when I started getting into more of the my own personal spiritual pursuit, meditation, all of that stuff, is when I started realizing it's not a metaphorical. Like there's actually something going on, and it took me a very long time to adopt that attitude. It's funny because I'm now, because of the changes that we're all going through as humanity, I also kind of, this wiggle between the more clicky, more, just kind of like, no, it is what it is kind of thing. And then in other days I soften up and I become much more like and we're holding hands and all of that stuff. That's wonderful too. And I can't really say that either one of them is the correct way to go about the world. I think people fall into one of these frames either because that's their signature, like that's how they're born and they just flow into that, or it's how they're raised. But we all have the capacity for both of them. And I think the more of us can just hold this neutral frame more often for ourselves and each other and the world. So there's less, again, as my friend Zoltan always says, we're not explaining, we're expressing. I think that's spot on, right? Because
Mm.
at the end of the day, we are expressing. It's rarely that we're truly explaining something like in a way that like what an explanation is, right? For the most part, we conflate the two. So I'm trying to remind myself more and more of that. My perception is more of like a somebody who just is in the world, and then I'm noticing what is happening, and I'm noticing what kind of wake I leave behind me, both in terms of the physicality and obviously also from a human perspective. Obviously, from a physical perspective, if you every time you leave the room, there's like a crazy mess. Oh, okay, maybe some assessment is required, right? The same goes for human interaction. I'm noticing more and more that what kind of imprint I'm leaving behind me when I'm interacting with other humans is is paramount, not just for me, but like for humanity, because that is the example we set for everybody else.
Mm.
If we can just, even if we disagree, if we can leave the room and people still want us back in the room, okay, we stand a chance. That's
Okay.
kind of where I'm coming from, and everything I'm doing is part of encouraging these kind of ways of doing things. One of the things that really disheartens me, maybe not for me because I truly have everything I have. I feel completely blessed. I'm surrounded by people who love me. I can't ask for anything beyond this. I'm truly very happy in life. But I'm watching people that want to walk into the space of what I'm doing, for example, physicists, and they would say things like, I am so excited about all of this and I want to contribute, but I can only consult. I can't put my name on it because I will lose everything. That's crazy.
Right.
Because what this is literally witch hunt. Like because you're gonna be saying certain words, you saying that there's a possibility you're gonna lose everything. Yeah.
Hmm.
What kind of world is this?
That's a
You know
problem
what I'm
with
saying?
our centralized models of science. It's not that science is bad, it's just that we've created these centralized models that it's all about reputation and status, and you don't get funds and grants if you start speaking to some guy that talks about dimethyltryptamine, and
It's
that's
crazy.
unbelievable because true science is uncertainty. And to constantly be reminding yourself that until we get comfortable with uncertainty, you have no business being a scientist or being a curious person. You just stay in ignorance, which is the whole metaphor of the Garden of Eden. It's like you stay here in this place, and if you eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, well, the Gnostics would say to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and it was maybe a mushroom or some sort of non-ordinary state that gets you cast into this infinite world that goes on forever. And I love that the relationship that you seem to have to reality is that you're interacting, processing, as like Robert Anton Wilson would say. You're constantly butting up against a new thing that changes your consciousness all the time. So you're constantly updating your expression, if you will. And I think ideology seems to be the parasite of the human condition. It's like this thing that traps us where we go, this is it, and this is me. I'm in a camp and I'm on this path. And I think that's a safety mechanism because people are terrified of the unknown. They don't know what death is. So there's this whole like, we need to control and I want to have the answers. But it never makes you truly feel good at the core because somebody can come along and kick the sand out from underneath you because it is built on sand. We just don't know. It's a big mystery. We don't know where we came from, we don't know where we're going, and that's awesome. It's almost what makes this whole thing more interesting to me.
Hmm.
And you don't have to cling to the answers. You just keep updating your operating system, if you want to call it that. I mean, that's a very limited word as well. But anyway, I
No, I
like
think it's
where you're
accurate.
going with this.
I'm absorbing everything you're saying. You're saying everything. I'm just agreeing with everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
true open-endedness is something that what a true scientist and true science should always have. It's
Mm-hmm.
these pockets of it's a stale period in a scientific trajectory when it gets to places where it becomes dogmatic. And you have these philosophies like shut up and calculate, which is like completely missing the point of what science is, right? It's truly losing yourself in the tools versus what science really is, which is about explanation. And this kind of stuff happened in the past very often, and it's a human, fault, and that's okay. It will express itself again and again. Our job is to keep trying to open it again, open it
Yeah.
again, open it again. But again, not to an infinite degree. I don't remember if Terence was quoting somebody else or he was just saying it himself. I think he was quoting somebody else. But the famous quote of "Open your mind, but not so much that your brain might fall out." Right. So just
Yeah.
there's a limit. Like there is a frame you need to hold to do something, and that's okay.
Sure.
That's also beautiful. The limitation is actually the grace of God. Truly, like it's if you can do anything, you don't even know where to begin. There's some limitations are a good thing, and I think this is why following some central line of some sort is always a good idea. The question is, what are you following, and how do you find it? And I think we all know what the ultimate central column is. I guess you can call it God or whatever you want to call it, but there is this impulse that takes you to the infinite channel versus all the limited ones. And there's a lot of turns along the way that will try and steer you in the wrong direction because they gain energy from you moving through these roads.
Mm-hmm.
And we essentially just have to stay on the path of light, on the path of understanding, of whatever that is. and it's hard to put it into any kind of, it's hard to describe it in words that will not sound like, you know, like the sages spoke versus like a scientist would speak. And I think
Mm,
that's a mistake our culture made, which is to put them into two separate camps. True wisdom encompasses all domains and all modalities. There is nothing that it excludes. And that I think was lost because usually the younger, faster, clickier sound is the one that is more alluring and more attractive. The elder village archetype kind of disappeared from the culture because the values that came from that don't seem to be translating to immediate possibility in the future.
mm,
Somebody, again, I wish I would remember more where I'm getting these ideas because they're brilliant
mm.
and they're not mine.
Yeah.
But
No one has original ideas.
you know, sometimes we do, and that's okay to admit that. By the way, that's another thing
Well,
I'm
I
writing a
just
lot
wonder if
about.
it could be original because it's built upon your capacity to have the idea in the first place, which you couldn't have had without everything before that. You know what I mean? Like Carl Sagan would
Here's
say,
how
you
I'm
can't
seeing
make
it.
an apple pie, that
Yeah,
type of philosophy.
here's how I'm seeing this. If
Okay.
everything is already written, then what's the point? I think
Yeah.
reality. I think reality. What it's doing, because think about what this, what the sentiment denotes. What it really denotes is humility. This phrase, "I know enough to know I know nothing," it's an overshooting an idea that is true to a large degree, but isn't infinitely true. So what I mean by that is that, of course, you know something. In fact, you know something that nothing else in existence knows. There's something original in you that never existed before and never will exist again. And that thing is exactly the genius that reality wants you to bring forth. So it's a very tiny sliver of the rest of it, of course, but it isn't nothing. And when we just say we know nothing, we basically we we let go of the one responsibility reality wanted us to have, which is stand on the ground you were born to stand on. That is important. Reality wants you to do that. There's something novel in each and every one of us that needs to be brought into the picture, and together we can build a picture. If everybody can say I know nothing, then reality knows nothing more than it knew in the beginning, which what would be the point, right? So
It's true.
that's where I think it's overshooting. The sentiment is overshooting. But I agree with
Hmm.
the general sentiment. Of course, that we know
Yeah.
way less than we think we do. That I agree with. Um,
And I
but
just I think I made a more of an idea that your original idea is built upon the fact that, like you just said, the unique expression that each individual has or experience that each individual has, which is unique to that being.
Mhm.
I get that for sure, but it couldn't have been had without all of the other, which means that nothing's separate if you go back to the ancient
And
texts
yet
of
reality
yoga.
would be nothing without all of our points of view. So it's again, it's a relationship, right?
Yeah.
That I'm not so speaking about me in particular. I'm more speaking to the general concept of this kind of utterance because it's a meme, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
know it. I mean, I think it was Platine. Who said it? Well, there was a lot of philosophers, but somebody like famously said that, right? I think it was. No, it wasn't Plato. I don't remember, but some Greek philosopher, and basically he said at the end of his life, like I know nothing, which is of course wrong. It's just wrong. But the sentiment stands. So the idea that I heard recently that really resonates with me because I think it's absolutely true, is that the reason for a lot of the turmoil in our current, at least Western culture, is because it used to be the case that what held the bridge together between the elders and the younger generation, which kept on trickling down the wisdom, so which smoothened the process of civilizations, was the fact that if the youngsters would to survive in a culture, they were bound by the fact that people that are older than them always held some kind of a knowledge about a craft, about something that would be relevant to them as they're coming up the ranks. And if they sever that connection, even though they have the very strong young impulse of like, I know everything, you don't know nothing, they were kind of bound by the fact that they have to listen because otherwise they will be left with nothing, right? Now, the technology that is available flipped it upside down because the only thing that is truly relevant to our culture at the moment is all the tech. And who's really good at the tech? The youngsters. So now they have a verification check of like, yeah, I don't need you. You know
Hmm.
nothing about that. I don't need you at all. And because of that, that connection is severed, and the wisdom no longer trickles down. And you have this like very hedonistic, like very just like, oh, I'm gonna get what I'm gonna get, and look at that. The world tells me it's true because look at all this money I'm making. Look at all, you know. And so we need to find a new kind of a. Let me turn off Discord because it's making these weird sounds. So we need some kind of a new bridge, some kind of a way to convince younger people that there is value in the wisdom for the sake of wisdom. And I think that's the tail sign of a true mature society where younger generations no longer need to be cajoled or convinced by a carrot, by some kind of a carrot where they're going to win something, but just they already have, culture has already built into it the understanding that wisdom must be adopted early on, regardless to any reciprocation or visible reciprocation in the future. I
Hmm.
think that's the true test because ultimately, just like for people, civilizations also have a maturing process. And we are that child that thinks they know everything. And it's not like the child knows nothing. The child brings the fresh energy of everything. But we do need to acknowledge the fact that there are deep and important understandings that probably already exist for ions and ions in the universe before we came on online. And we have to listen to these wisdoms, and they exist everywhere and
Hmm.
every moment in life, even without any interaction with psychedelics, uh, with raising kids, with hardships in life. The reason that these things invoke wisdom is because they force a moment of understanding in a very limited period of time. That's what emergency does for you. That's what, again, difficult situations like raising children for years does for you. It's you have to struggle through a task and you have to resolve it now. That puts you on in a particular mind state and in a particular state of being that tells you something greater about what the world, what is expecting us in the future.
Hmm.
That a lot of this sentiment, I feel that is we need to together bring back versus demand it coming back.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm hearing underneath all of this is the tech, and I want to get into this at some point. Your idea about AGI and how you think it's one of our only chances that we have is what I heard you say, and maybe we'll unpack that in a bit. But before we get there, I wanted to see what your understanding and feedback has been on the history of MK Ultra and big tech companies. I don't know if you ever listened to Dr. Jack Cruz on Danny Jones. The first time he was on there, he went on for 4 hours about this evolution of, Operation Paperclip and Mockingbird and the development of the CIA. And I've delved into it probably more than the average person, just because it's curious to me, like who is engineering the technology and the society that we live in, social engineering, cultural engineering. And it's always been one of my main things to get curious about once I discovered that I myself was a giant walking, talking, sort of interacting program. Like a lot of who I am has been conditioned from my birth, right? Not that my deeper older self that comes through in the archetype, or if you want to call that your genes, whatever your older essence is, obviously comes through. But you've got this ability now, once people understand the psychology, which they do to a high degree, a lot of these really incredible institutions, especially the ones that are tied now to the psychedelic movement, but I want to unpack a little bit about social and cultural engineering and the use of tech and how it's being siloed. And there's all these algorithmic feedbacks that are driving what you talked about, which is these young people that have access to maybe this new incentive to be status driven or for profit or whatever they want to tap into, that's at the primal element. It's to keep you raped for your attention. It's an attention economy. And so the incentivization is what drives the outcome. It's what drives the behavior of the species. And so if you start to look at an attention war, at the core, if you're trying to be like, well, what's true is that I have some sort of awareness, right? If something's happening from nothing. I'm having an experience, and then you're trying to focus your attention to some degree on certain things, whether it be inwardly or outwardly. And if you have a super highly sophisticated technological externalization of our nervous system, which is what we've made. We've created this, and it's happened in a short period of time. When we think of this screen time and microchips and all this stuff, and the ability to get online, the weird part that we have to just think about is like, all right, do we believe in AGI if the underlying incentivization structure was created by DARPA and by the CIA and MK Ultra, and they have somewhat of a lock and key on this thing? So like you said, we have to spend more time unplugging. I think spending more time in nature, and you call this nature. This tech is nature, and so are cities. I'm with you there, but it's not that it's there's ways of, I guess we could think about our relationship to our tech is just one way of relating to it, and we've
What
been
do you mean by that?
fed, meaning that, let's see, like if we were to wipe civilization out right now, boom, and in
Mhm.
15,000 years, all they had left was the pyramids, maybe the Hoover Dam and Mount Rushmore and a few giant megalithic structures, and maybe some tribal beings came back up because they're the ones that would survive. These people in the Amazon jungle that are really good at interacting with nature, they would probably survive the mess, and they were to rebuild civilization. Tech would unfold and language would unfold differently each time because there's always infinite potential for the way the interactions are going to unfold. So it may not look the same. And so we may even have a different way of interacting with our tech, whatever it came to look like, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Because
Okay.
consciousness is not linear. It's more like, you know, particles, vibration, frequency. So I would think that it would just evolve so differently every single time. Um, but right now we're in a current stratosphere, or you could call this like a current ecosystem, where the technology that we're creating is sort of siloed with this. It's captured by a very few billionaires and companies, these big tech companies, and they're deploying the technology in a way that's shaping our consciousness in ways that are unconscious to the individuals that are interacting with it. So it is mind control. And I think that when you start to praise this transhuman movement, or you start to think that it's our only hope and that AI is going to save us, I think you're being hijacked personally. I'm not saying this is the truth. I'm just exploring this idea because I think the
Yeah.
transhuman movement is being deployed, and it's an ideology, and it's a new religion. And I think we'd be better off going back to the caves and enjoying the chaos personally.
So it's
So,
really a matter of emphasis and magnification. That's it. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's
no,
a
yeah,
very simple.
exactly.
Well, but I mean, but something very specific by that, which is the only difference between the two sentiments of what you would call transhumanist and what you would
Okay.
call the more archaic oriented is where you want your stability to stay. That's it. It's not really a right or wrong. It's just humanity might split, and you might have the one that wants to proceed and explore space forever, and the one that said we had enough. We want to go back to the caves.
Well, and we
By
could,
all
I'm not
means.
saying that, I guess I wouldn't want to go back to the caves, but I would want to
How come?
decentralize
But that's important. How
our,
come?
the caves. Well, because we've done that over and over again. I think we've seen when
And
you
you don't
study
think we've
ancient,
done this over and over again?
not in this way.
How do you know that?
I don't know that. I would be very happy to say I have no
Exactly.
idea.
So the only thing we can do is everything you just mentioned, DARPA, the mind control, these are
Mm-hmm.
ideas you have. You don't know if any of this is true. So
That's
you heard
true.
somebody on a podcast, just like you heard me on a
Sure.
podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
I said an idea, they said an idea. What is true? The only thing we
That's
really know is what we have right in front of us and how it feels to be in the moment, right? So ultimately, the first recognition for me and the way where I'm coming from is that I have to operate out of first principles. And the first principles tell me a few things. One of them is that humans were basically almost always wrong about everything. But that's not just humans. That's basically everything that ever existed. So that's the norm, right? So you have some horizon of understanding and evolution that is always happening. Evolution is a natural process that is happening, and we see it all around us, not just in life, but also in terms of how the universe is evolving. There's a state, and then there's a different state that is arising from the previous state. That's natural to the universe. Then there's the issue of certain kinds of delusions that humans had over the times in history, that then the already preconceived and pre-existing sentiments are always trying to claim for themselves. So what I mean specifically is that people first. This is something that I heard Charles Eisenstein talk about originally, and I think it's absolutely true. Which is, people are not reasoned into positions. They basically demand reason to defend their positions. So you already have a position, and we can go into why that is, but you have a certain sentiment, you have a certain intuition about what you want to be more true than not. And then everything we do, because we are a reasoning machine, is to try and fold everything we see around us into the frame that we have already. Right now, it's rare that, but it does happen when people kind of being reasoned into or out of positions. But ultimately, what you want to look at is, what is the most likely survival attitude that we can hold over time. And some people might even bite the bullet and say, you know what, I don't even care about that. I just want to live as long as I can live exactly how I am now, and I don't want anything else. Also, very acceptable. This is why I keep saying that the thing is, what is your level of magnification, and what is your sentiment that you're trying to bring into the world? I think one of the delusions that is clear to me that is always occurring in humans, which is that they, whatever it is that feels really close to what they call their heart, they immediately assume that universally, that's a universal thing. That, I think, has no reason to accept that whatsoever, because every single time we thought that, it was proven to be wrong in ways that were detrimental to humanity, and it took us many, many years to climb out of these situations. So the way that I see it, true wisdom is A, not repeating the same mistakes we made in the past, and also not to allow fear to inform our future decisions. We can be aware, but being afraid doesn't make a lot of sense at this point, right? So I can give you a specific example. So, for example, the example I always give is that this sentiment of don't venture out of the village, that's a very old one. And it's a very strong one because it incorporates an emotion that is one of the most powerful emotions for humans, which is shame. Shame is a very powerful emotion because it's a lose-lose situation. It's both you lost something actually, and then you also lose socially, which is the biggest loss for humans. You lose the support of the group, right? If somebody told you don't venture out of the village, and you still ventured out of the village because for whatever reason, and then you failed, not only you failed and that hurts, you also come back and you're now a social pariah. Like now nobody wants to. It's like so. Shame is a very strong emotion in humans, which people are very afraid of. So the don't venture out of the village is a very strong emotion. And I think that what you're expressing right now, and again, you're not alone, right? You're in good company. There's a lot of very smart people that agree with you. I disagree with that. I think that is the don't venture out of the village blown up to the max, to civilization. It's the same sentiment of don't sail into the oceans, you will fall off the face of the earth.
Let
Because
me
in
just,
the end,
I want you
well,
to keep
before you
ranting.
give me your
Okay, go ahead.
correction,
Yeah.
the one thing to notice there, wherever it came from, it's the delusion part is that if you'll stay put, it will be better. It won't be. Wolves will come to the village. Danger will find
Sure.
you wherever you are. That's not going anywhere. There's no plateau where you're going to be safe. So the only way, the only reasonable way is to proceed forward, and according to how I see it, and then you basically just make the necessary correction along the way. This idea that because we proceed towards greater understandings, we create more problems, that's the specific point of that I'm claiming is a delusion. We're not causing it. It's the natural state of affairs. It's just how it happens. Problems are inevitable. It's just it's going to happen. No matter how many things you solve, there's always going to be more problems. So to say, hey, should we just go back to more archaic ways because we're overstepping it? I'm sure you heard me say this if you saw the Danny Jones podcast, but basically Look, in the end, the sun will become a red giant. How are you going to cross that one? Talking about global warming, right?
That's actually an idea, though, that you have based on the physics. And you know what I mean? Going back to, do you for certain know that?
If you
You're doing the
no,
same thing.
according to, that's why I said you have to drop your anchor somewhere. No,
Yeah.
we do know that. So
But we
this is
also
something
know
that
that there's people, we also know that there's organized crime and there's organized folks that do run the tech companies that don't
you
have our
don't know
best
this with the same
interest.
amount of certainty. You don't know this with the same amount of certainty. You have ideas about some people doing that and other people's not doing that. But the sun will become a red giant. That's 100% certainty.
Right. But
Yeah.
it
So
also is pretty certain that, like, how did you feel about the pandemic? You know, there was obvious nefarious planning that went on, and no one's being held accountable. I'm not saying you should be in fear and not progress and not look forward and drive technology, because I'm not that way. Believe me, I love reading Yuval Noah Harari. I like the tech guys. I have Kevin Kelly coming on in a week or
for
two.
sure.
I'm all about tech, and I love using it, and I think we're going to evolve with it. And I also don't care if we make it or don't make it, as far as, like, I can't stop the tidal wave. It'd be like me out surfing in the ocean and thinking I could stop the ocean from moving or something. It's so silly. But I do see that there's a obvious centralized issue with the funding and where things are driving to where people are being raped for their attention. It seems so obvious. If you can't see that people are stuck on their screens and that they have more issues psychologically, mentally, and that there's some sort of orchestrated incentivization structure driving an attention
That
economy.
second part I'm not sold on. So
Which
the
part?
I understand. So the part of the there's some mastermind that is doing all of this sitting behind closed doors. I think that the more likely situation is that you have incentives, and you have, obviously, financial incentives are very strong. So you have giant companies that make a lot of money from people's attention. So all of that is true. So they would do everything they can to pull your attention. We know that people can absolutely be manipulated in masses. So the thing that where I depart from these sentiments is that unless I can do something about that, actually, I am now burning fuel that I don't need to, when I can actually enjoy my moment to moment. The flip side of that is the things that I do know where I want to place my bets, like the sun becoming a red giant and becoming an interstellar civilization, because that excites me. I want to put my efforts there, both in terms of talking about it and encouraging it. And you're not going to be able to do that without these tools. So now, is this part of the natural course of evolution? I say yes. Some people would say no. The part that I'm saying that people kind of miss the mark is just, in the name of humility, because that's what they think they're doing, they are essentially postulating us as the most special thing that ever existed. Because they're saying, think even the term itself, transhumanist. Okay, so everything transcended from what it was. Everything evolved, right? To this. So when you say transhumanist, you're essentially saying, this is why. Why do we want to proceed from this? That's not up to us. It's just what's happening. It's part of the natural course of evolution. The idea that we should just stay put is clinging. It's clinging to what is now. It's basically the attachment to flesh, because there's two sentiments that are competing right now, specifically in the zeitgeist, which is that the one that is saying, okay, too fast, too fast, too fast. Let's slow down. Let's bring it back to the body. That's one sentiment. The other one is like, hey, that's the thing that is about to free us. If we can solve paraplegic people, blind people, and then the answer from the people that are saying this first sentiment is, this is a trap. This is a trap. Look, you're going to this thing. You're flying too close to the sun. It's the thing that's going to be the end of us. This sentiment was expressed endlessly throughout history, which is, don't sail into the ocean, it's too dangerous. Don't venture out of the village. That's what I'm saying. This side also has its own response to this, which is what I'm saying essentially. It's like, look, you're being cagey, like you clinging. Who is right? There is no right. It's just where it's like islands of stability. It's true that there might be a situation where you playing with too many things here, you might destroy everything. Of course, it's always there, but you can also perish just by staying here. That's why I'm saying there's no right answer. It's just what people
Yeah.
prefer. But I choose to look at it not as a competition, but as just the understanding that we all have different natural predispensations. Some people are gardeners, Other people are explorers. It's not, none of them is correct. It's just they want to do more of this and they want to do more of this. If you project me right now to 2,000 years in the future, and we still didn't leave Earth, that is the most depressing idea to me that you can possibly imagine. It's depressing on a level like, just take me out. I don't want anything to do with humans anymore. Like,
That's
truly,
awesome.
like, I don't want anything to do with humans. We are the one. Pardon my, but I mean this in the dictionary definition of the word, not in the derogatory way. This is a retarded species. It
Hmm.
literally retards. Like, it does not evolve anymore because of some thing. So now, it does not mean that because a lot of humans would want to venture into space, everybody needs to go. You will have people that wouldn't want to go anyway, and that's beautiful. That's beautiful. That should be the case. We need people to stay and care for home and create more beautiful biospheres and tend to the gardens and create heaven on earth. We need that. It does not compete with the idea of going out there. It's part of the natural state of affairs, how it always was and always will be. You will have people that are more connected to this, and it's not even flesh. They're just more connected to the this moment, right? And the ones that are very up there, like
Yeah. No,
go,
I
go, go.
think we agree. I think I agree with you on all of that because I do see that, first of all, you can't stop it. It's nature, it's happening. I'm not trying to stop the tech from moving forward, but I do think it's nice to, at the same time, while we evolve, pay attention to the people that are, you know, doing things that are nefarious. And there always is bad actors. And if we don't hold them accountable to some degree, even on the micro level of your own environment, like as a subjective being, I'm walking around, it's like, okay, maybe if there's blue lit technology that's not good for my mitochondrial health, as you hear, or something so simple, then you go out and you get sunshine more and you get off your screen more, you block it at night, or whatever the simple shift is in your behavior. But if you find out that there's a company like Google or one of these companies, and they're buying up all of the computer screens that are out there to block all of the healthy spectrum of light because they want to use blue lit technology supposedly to put you into more of a suggestible state. Things like this, which you're saying is all not true because you want to go back
No, I
to
didn't say
first
it's all not
principles.
true. I'm saying that the degree to which that is nefarious in the most uh, in the degree to which it's egregious, in the sense that somebody is like, no, we know how to do it better and we won't. Of course it happens, but I think it's more often, even in larger scales, it's more often that it's kind of easier to not do anything to change things, right? So then we want to create, I guess the sentiment that I'm trying to encourage is less of the hatred of that, because the hatred itself is an energy field and it
Yeah.
creates more of that. So if you just show that there's a better way, also financially incentivizing way, if you can do that, then you can actually help the dial a lot more in a way that you will never be able to do if we just kind of like speak of the you don't know what's happening behind closed, because it
Yeah.
creates
Well,
fear.
sometimes the awareness changes immediately. As soon as you become aware that something is bad or you found out that it was nefarious, you immediately change or you start to buy from a different company. So it's actually the first step is to feel the emotional response of the truth that you discovered. So it's not necessarily a waste of time you're not demonizing it, but if I find out that a local company in my neighborhood is treating their employees bad and that they're or whatever it is, or they're poisoning the food, obviously I'm going to tell the whole neighborhood and that guy's going to go out of business.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I
No,
just
I
feel like
agree. The only thing I guess I'm specifically speaking about is that, and I'm always trying to speak in generalities because the only thing that really influences anything, right? You
hmm
might express the sentiment in a much more balanced way, and that's beautiful. But you know that this sentiment is not expressed in a balanced way in most of society. A lot of the guests on Danny Jones, and I told them this, right? It's a very fear based. It's a very kind of like, you don't know what's going on. You should be way more worried than you are. That's not helping
it's
anyone.
like fear
That's
selling.
it's
Yeah.
fear mongering. It's like, even if you're right about that, the
Yeah.
attitude shouldn't be let's burn them to this. The fact that listen, that thing I think should exemplify for anybody with a, especially if you're interested in the awakening. If whatever the reason you think it is, right? If you feel glee or even lack of care for the CEO that was murdered, you're part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
You're part of the problem. You are not part of the solution. It doesn't matter why that is. That's not how we do things.
Right.
That's not how an enlightened civilization does things. And if you want to push towards that, then you are just that little kid throwing a tantrum.
Right.
No, I've had enough. Well,
Yeah. No,
no, you don't
I
do
try
things
to
like that. Yeah,
encourage myself and friends and people I love to, first of all, you don't know enough to worry, as McKenna once said.
yeah,
And you start with those foundational. I personally explore people like you. This is fun to me. There's not
yeah.
like some thing that I'm clinging to that like, oh no, man, Danny got me there and now I have to freaking go back to the drawing board. My whole life's a mess. It's like, no, this is actually really entertaining because we're exploring ideas and consciousness, and at the base I should be grateful for the fact that I'm having an experience called life or consciousness or awareness or whatever you want to call it. And so then I can explore into any avenue. I've been lucky to be able to do this in my life where I can read a book about like Tom O'Neill's book Chaos, and read about MK Ultra and go, oh my god, they make Manchurian candidates, like maybe this is all part of history. But I don't worry that they're going to get us or something, or that we're screwed. I'm more just like, find it interesting. I want to find out more about what they've learned in these programs and how are they deploying them today, and how much of our society is shaped by these really interesting sort of centralized models of intelligence, and they deploy them outwardly. So a lot of what we think we know is just conditioned. I've
Well,
always found that.
I wouldn't be surprised to learn if at the end of time we kind of get to look at everything back and we get all the answers. I would not be surprised to learn that all of these ideas we have about all of these, entities are operating in the shadows were in fact themselves the orchestration and the main tool of these organizations, where all these people that are like ex-CIA go to the thing and tells you the story. They were in fact the tool that was utilized by these entities to make you afraid, to make you susceptible to. That was the actual prison. And this is why I keep telling people, if I have to
That's
give you one
interesting.
advice, yeah, if I want to give you one advice, which is like, how do you feel this morning? Good, awesome, keep it. D- Keep it. Like, what are you contributing to yourself if you're just going like, this is literally like a drug hit. It's like a, ooh, I want to know what's wrong with the world. Just turn off the news. Like,
Yeah.
just don't worry about it. And you're not. It's not selfish. It's the opposite. Because the more people can just feel good inside, the chances that things will go wrong in the aggregate are way smaller. If you can't influence the situation, it's going to create the amount of tension in you that you cannot resolve, it cannot touch. It's the ultimate scratch that you cannot itch, and
Hmm.
it's awful. That's what all of these things create. So if I go to this, people are like, "Oh, did you hear about it?" I'm like, "No," and I don't want to hear it. I don't care. Can I go right now and change it? Then I will ask you the details about it so I can make informed decisions. If I can't or not willing to, which is most people not willing to, then I don't want to know about it. It's the economy and the diet of my input is very important to me because there's limited, the older we get, the more it's become clear, right? There's limited amount of energy and hours in the day. Do I want to feel more positive emotions or less positive emotions? Obviously, I want to experience more positive emotions. And it has nothing to do with being delusional. The delusion is I'm going to inform myself about things that I cannot possibly change, and I'm
Hmm.
helping the world by knowing this and spreading that. First of all,
Yeah.
you don't know this. Yeah, it's.
The only caveat to that I see is that in my life and in many people's lives, you realize that the best music, art, technology, social change comes from pain and suffering and from awareness and
I
from
will change your
this.
mind. I will change
I'm
your
just
mind with
saying,
one
no,
word.
and
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like even on the micro level, like if we give everybody micro dosing and get them stoned and get everybody into psychedelics, and you deploy that sort of idea of like, let's just feel good and basically have a festival every day, you don't see transformation on the same exact level. I'm not saying you should just sulk in your negative emotion, but I think it's actually more of a time, a critical time now than ever, to get more grounded and rooted and start seeing what's actually real and unplug a little bit more, just so we can start to make better decisions and actually feel, like slowing down enough to feel. Because if we just get swept up in the wave of trying to feel good every day, it leads to more and more unintended consequences. Not saying we shouldn't feel good. I feel pretty lucky to feel good most days, almost all the time. But then it also if I, in my reality, I also notice I'm a fireman. So obviously I see people suffering all the time. And most of it's mental health stuff. So if I want to triage and get to the root, it's like, all right, why do we have a mental health crisis, right? And I've thought about that, and I've explored these ideas for a long time, and a lot of it is just people speeding up, not slowing down. And I'm not saying that's the solution, but when people are just caught up in the wave and the hype of let's just feel good, dopamine, dopamine nation, it doesn't seem to be working out so well. And I'm not saying that's what your approach is, but I think pain and suffering is a vital part of being human, not to sulk, but to create the thing that we actually want to create, or to find solutions, or to serve others. It creates service. And so if you see somebody suffering, or you see a bunch of dogs that don't have homes, it activates each individual in different ways to create a business or to create solutions, and that gives them meaning and purpose and value. So I think it's good to feel bad sometimes. And I think some of the problem in our culture right now is that everybody's trying to feel good all the time. That's what addiction is.
Yeah, the point wasn't to try and feel seek the good. The point is to
Mm.
try and stay equanimous as possible. So you can experience the emotion without the reaction to the emotion. The bad will come, the good will come. The point isn't seeking either. So it's not go and seek the good feelings, but it's also don't go seek the bad feelings, which is what all social media is. So which is that you seeking the bad. We don't frame it that way, but it's exactly what we're doing. We're essentially seeking that dopamine hit, either from the good or from the bad. We don't care. We just want the dopamine hit. So I'm actually, the thing that I'm advocating for is equanimity, because that will allow you to actually bring about the right kind of change that actually needs to be in the moment. You know that from being a firefighter, that in the case of an emergency, aside from the fact that you're highly trained to do so and you're also very experienced because you have many years of experience, but you know better than most that turning off too much of the analytical stuff when it's go time is crucial, because then all your training comes to you just kind of know what to do, and over time you develop better and better intuitions, right? But the second you start doing these concentric circles extrapolations, it takes brain power, it takes you out of what needs to be done. And I'm claiming that most of the stuff that we think we're doing, we're not doing. This is just kind of like we're just stuck in our mind. We're not actually bringing up change. Some people do. Some people are activists and they take it to the streets and they take it like, okay, that is a different story. Like you're doing something with it. I understand. But most people don't do that. They just post something, on social media, repost something and feel good about themselves. You did nothing. You perpetuated more of that thing. That's it. And for the most part, it's probably not true either. So it's like I personally think that most humans are good. Systems have certain incentives. I think that the way that I'm going about it is I'm trying to make it personal. When people say the government or they or I think what most people don't realize is most people in the government, they just show up to work just like you, drink their coffee, even in the Pentagon, right? They just drink their coffee, and they would have a meeting. Most people are not into these like they're not part of these like secret cabals. Like they just go to work, right? And they have change in their pockets. Like it's just normal people. And when you start seeing it that way, you start to understand, oh, if they did wrong, it's because of whatever incentives we created as a society. And I understand the frustration that people have with these things, but the point isn't you should just, not notice that. The point is that if you can't notice it without being swept away by all the negative emotions that it invokes, then you are not doing anyone a favor. You are just becoming more miserable, which contributes to this larger machine of everybody being miserable. And in addition to that, we encourage finger pointing, which is of course the easiest form of shaking off responsibility, because this is why I said at the end of Danny Jones' podcast, which is how how many things have you done today to actually help other people? You personally, you can say you do it pretty often. That's your job. Okay, so listen, you picked a really good one because your karma is definitely getting a lot of bumps because of that. But for most people, they never really get the opportunity to actually contribute to somebody else's life. And if people would seek more of that, they wouldn't care so much about what Bill Gates is doing or anybody else. They would just be doing the good work, you know. And if there would come a moment where they find themselves in a pivotal situation or a moment where they can, you know, bring the change that is necessary, I assure you, the right answers will come if more often than not, when you're in the present moment, when you truly are there, it will tell you, hey, you should speak to this person in this way. You should voice your opinion strongly right now because it matters. Awesome. But if you just do this 24/7, it's just like you seeking the good feelings through drugs or sex or whatever it is. That's just another form of entertainment, which is just the negative kind. Equanimity is what I'm. And to your question, to your comment about music, it's not necessarily that I want to like get into the. It's just the case that until now, most of humanity was suffering most of the time. So all the profundity had to come through whatever was available the most, which was the suffering. And I think that's why it seems like the best music, the best comedy comes from suffering. I used to think that too. I don't think that anymore because I have met comedians and I have met musicians that create things that made me cry, and they are definitely not coming from suffering. They're coming from love and transcendence, and they're just as beautiful, if not more beautiful. I'm gonna send you a profile by this a good friend. Her name is Iris. She's a musician. She's technically trained as a classical pianist, but she's basically a real life fairy, like for all intents and purposes. What you see on the page is real. This is not an act. She's not acting. That's how she is in real life. She literally floats, right? She's literally an angel. And you listen to her music for 2 seconds, it's not coming from suffering.
Hmm.
And this is, I think, the thing that needs to. I was born in Russia, and I grew up in Israel. So talking about two countries that went through some things, okay? I'm not a foreigner to the country of suffering. I'm very well versed in suffering.
Hmm.
But it's exactly because of that I'm telling you that it absolutely is possible to produce the most beautiful things. And the only way to actually bring about a new world is to believe that other attitudes are possible. We we cooked in these juices. I think you and I are from the same generation, so I know what you're talking about. But I think we're climbing out of that, and we need to encourage more of that. We want our kids to grow in a world where this is truly a foreign concept to them,
Hmm.
and this is not to sugarcoat anything for them. That they can be aware of all the ills of the world, but we have to create a system that makes it clear that we, as the generation that is bringing them forth to then bring the future, believe that that channel is truly possible.
Yeah.
And so we can't postulate like all the negatives, I think.
There's so much to talk to you about. It's fun because I know how much time you've spent in those alternative realms, right? And I'd love to, because at the core, when you go into a space, and I don't know, I wanted to ask you about the Vilca space. You ever heard of Vilca? It's probably more of a slang name, but you were talking about it, I think, where there's from an Andean tree, it's like a seed where they roast it up and then you sniff it, but it's a DMT combo. It's got two different types. It lasts about 45 minutes. Yeah, so this guy I met, Don Howard, he was down in the jungle for 30 years. Long story short, basically, I became really close with him towards the end of his life. I went down there, spent a few weeks with him, and at the end of his 2 weeks, where you're using Wachuma, which is San Pedro, and ayahuasca and different plant medicines, the very last night he would give Vilca, and you would actually sniff it out of a 2,000-year-old finger bone from Chavin, like this shaman's bone, and it was basically a sniffing device. And it was a 45-minute. He said it was the most powerful combination of dimethyltryptamine on the planet because it had two different types, 5-MeO and DMT, combined from this tree, from the seed of a tree. But I thought maybe you knew what the actual name was because I could have swore it was you that said it. But anyway,
What is?
either way,
How did you say the name?
Vilca, Vilca, and they had been doing it for a long time down in Chavin. And this was a place in Central or South America where people would come from all over, and
The
you've
Andes.
probably heard of this. But anyway,
No, I never heard of this. So
this
basically, it's a They shoot it into your nose just like hape, but this
Very
is
similar to hape, but not hape. Obviously, it's DMT
yeah.
combination. But the
The way they
same
administer it,
same
yeah.
idea of how you get it into your, and within 1 minute, you, if you're willing to surrender and let go, and all the preparation and all that goes into it, obviously, like, but once you're in that space, which I was able to get to, it's 45 minutes to an hour long. It's no 10-minute trip like the
Yeah,
average experience, right? And
interesting.
ayahuasca obviously is a 4 or 5 hour, depending on what you're doing. So that's different
Mhm.
because it's a little subtler and you go in and out. And but anyway, the Vilca is interesting, and everyone has similarities. Just like when I was intrigued by your work of what you were seeing with the code, where you're seeing this translucent space. You're in it, and there's so much deja vu you couldn't wrap your head around it. And there's nothing but language all around you, and it looks like hieroglyphs, and they're all beaming with light, and you're being hit with energetics of understanding, this like telecommunication where it's almost like just infinite understanding in this space. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because at the core I went, what's the point here? Like, what do we do if I ever have to go back into this third dimensional space, right?
Mhm.
What do you do down there, basically? And before I even asked that, actually, I tried to come up with this idea of love or of fear, and in the walls and everything were giggling almost with like humor because it was non-existent in that space. And at the core of the question of what do you do down there, the whole experience in that realm up there that I was experiencing, which was non-physical, obviously, um, was love. And obviously, I'm using a word, but it was so much of that essence that I realized that when I do go back into that body, if I do, if I'm lucky enough, because I thought, oh, I really did it. Now I'm dead. You had to sort of die to get there. Um, and I remember thinking they're going to find my body here in the jungle, and I was like, I don't care. This is amazing. I'm so willing to explore this. It felt so good because the way that Howard prepared me. But anyway, I just remember feeling that that was the core uh, experience. And when I came back to my body, the first thing I wanted to do was go give Howard a hug and say thank you, man. Like, tears of joy. And I obviously also knew that I couldn't remain in that state forever because you wouldn't be able to survive on this planet. And that was something I was realizing, was this 3D realm that we're in, we have to use fear, like you said, without being swept by it, to navigate and to live in this domain. But the essence of all the great teachers that have ever lived seems to come back to that core, which is what I keep hearing an underlying thread come from you, which is love. And yeah, I was curious if you'd had that experience. It sounds like it's somewhat of a
Yeah,
newer term.
with a tiny modification that it's not love, it's equanimity that I'm advocating for. They're two separate emotions. Love has more of a vector, even if it's love towards self, and it's one of the most beautiful states. Obviously, if it's pure love, but it is ultimately unsustainable because it's just equanimity is where it's at in terms of the ultimate state of affairs, right? Or at least that's what I'm advocating for. That's what the Buddha essentially was advocating for as well. And if I've ever had experiences that are just full transcendent love, yes, of course. I just think that when we are, like you said, in the 3D space, we have to bring these attitudes through whatever our current state of the shape that we are both internally and externally allows us to. So the love would come in a particular way, and it would have to be expressed in a way that is coming through the shape of the container. So certain people would express it one way, others would express it another way, and then ultimately, as a humanity will express it in a different way. I think that if we are to survive this whatever period it is why I keep encouraging go back to what feels right now. You see, it's so funny that because I'm watching. It's like you said, right? Okay, the idea that people have, this recoiling that people have from the technology part because they see everybody looking at their phones, right? This image of everybody like this on the phone and the rats running around like rats in the city. Where did everybody see that?
On a screen.
On their phone.
Mm-hmm. So it's like a feedback loop.
It's basically, I'll make a statement that would sound very radical to people. The phones are not a problem. That's it.
It's us. It's our attention
Yeah.
that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
If the finger pointing never stops, it's like, turn it off then. Put it aside. I can't, and that's somebody else's fault. Okay, if you say so. So that was the Buddha's deepest realization. Every moment in history will have a form of that thing that everybody are pointing to as the main problem.
Mm.
It's always us.
And you?
And we're not even the problem. We're it. This is on our level. This is it. There's nothing else that matters. If you have, let's say, I personally believe we're going to live for a lot longer, and I'm happy about it. Some people are not. But let's put an average, 90 years. If you have 90 years to live on this planet, the more you express and get to live more equanimous and beautiful moments, the much higher chance that whenever you encounter anybody else, that's the thing you're going to be transmitting to them, right? So the the prison is, it's the fact that no matter why we think we're doing it, it's the action, the actual moment of doing it is the thing. So like, if I'm saying, look, I want to help humanity to awaken. I've heard this recently on stage, and I was like, whoa, the level of not seeing it, right?
Mm.
There was a panel on stage. I was in the Conscious Life Expo. I was invited to speak, and then somebody invited me to come go into one of the rooms. And there was a panel of like maybe 12 people, all like super aware, conscious, wearing feathers, all that stuff. I wish I would be making this up. This is
No,
real.
I
And
believe
I'm not
it.
going to say who that was,
Yeah.
but like literally they're sitting on a panel and they're talking about all this stuff, and all of a sudden you feel this one spark and you go, this one spark of the pitchforks come out, because something was mentioned that everybody in that particular thought form believe is the devil, right? For everybody you have that, and in this case I think it was it was Fauci, and then there was Peter Thiel.
Mm.
And whatever you believe about these people, this is what was expressed on the panel. They was just talking about a new earth and new humanity. And then they went, yeah, but certain people we need to hang.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And then somebody said, hashtag kill Teal.
Jeez.
And then they started all laughing and saying kill Teal. And I'm sitting there. Now, right now, you're listening to me, and you might even agree with this. I don't know.
No.
But no, not you. Like if somebody's listening.
Oh,
But
yeah.
But imagine, right now I'm telling you about the story, and obviously I'm expressing the sentiment of how crazy that is. But I'm pretty sure that all of us, we have a version of this kind of a complete blinder zone where we don't realize we're doing that. This is what I keep saying, and I'm trying to catch myself as often as possible. The second you do this, you're opening the window for that to happen. Because collectively we feel very strongly, and it's very hard to stop. So being immune to that, to being a part of that whatever sentiment comes, is the only way to do that is to practice every day to not be the hostage of these ideas, even if you think that these ideas are in the service of the greater good. There are no ideas that will get you there. Ideas are tools. It's whatever needs to be in the moment. Some people
Mm-hmm.
are more naturally, kind of like just naturally, like, want to go with that sentiment. But I think most of us needs practice. You got to practice. And part of
Yeah.
that is understanding whatever ideas you have about, yeah, but this is the CIA, so we're justified to say that the CIA is doing something wrong. Sure, but you don't need to hate them. They're just people like you. They can't be like me. Yeah, just like you. They just found themselves in that job doing that thing. And people can't sometimes fathom that, which is just,
Mm-hmm.
it's just people like you. And yes, there are some psychopaths in the world, sure, but it's a tiny, tiny minority. Not a lot of people sit and go like, how can I hurt other people for my own personal joy of hurting them? That almost never happens. And the idea that people hold in their minds that that's the case sometimes, they take it with them everywhere. And then when they meet a particular person and they already have this like negative thing, that is the problem in its totality. Like it's just like if we can just go and enjoy whatever is in front of us and hey, make the necessary changes to actually change it when we can, great. But that's a very difficult undertaking. That's the thing that is so difficult to do. It's a
Yeah.
daily practice to jump off these horses that everybody trying to keep constantly. I don't know why. I feel blessed that I am like this, and I can't take credit for it. I'm allergic to being a part of groups.
Hmm.
It's automatic. I don't control it. Like the second somebody tries to make me part of a group, I'm like, I'm definitely
I'm
not part of
just,
your group.
I feel lucky in that way too. I feel like I have an antibody to it or something where I like to be not in a big group all the time or being swayed by too many ideas. But I'm curious because you seem to think that the universe is holographic in a sense, right? Is that what I heard? And so, because I read the holographic universe maybe 7 years ago, whatever that was, but
Yeah.
um, basically,
Well,
like, what do you think the implications are of if it is so that we're somewhat of in some sort of a hologram, and you've discovered this, what you did with the laser, and like you're trying to do experiments to see what these experiences that you've had are. What do you think the implications are as a species? Because it's obviously a big deal if you have a paradigm shift of how we relate to the nature of our experience, obviously from the gate, and you say, oh, actually, we're in a hologram, you know.
it doesn't really change anything in terms of immediate, how we should do things. But it
It
definitely
would,
changed.
though, right? It would change, like even what you just said about how people can't see things as like they're going after Peter Thiel with a pitchfork. If you were in a hologram and you realized you were in some sort of hologram and that all of your thoughts were a vibration and that you're just carrying, it would change the way that you clung to things or worried about things too. I would feel like it would create a whole
You
different
would
shift.
think, but that's not how people operate. People don't execute on a level of thought ever. Nothing changes somebody's mind aside from emotion. So people always act out of what they feel, never out of what they think or understand logically. Never. That never happens. If the logic eventually causes a certain internal signature of an emotion, then it will influence your actions. But the actions always come from emotions. Most people receive information in a way that is decoupled from how they feel. The only ideas that activate them emotionally strongly are the ones that already tend to do so. Like it's very difficult to. That's why it's so hard to reason somebody out of something because you need to do it a lot for a long time, and eventually something changes. And there needs to be also an openness of the other person to actually receive it that way, and usually that's not the case. So you would think that the second you have the right information, you would change your mind or change your ways. That never happens. I'm not 100% sure understanding how you connecting between the holographic principle, which is different, by the way, than the holographic universe book, because it talks about it from a completely different perspective, to thinking that we should do things differently. Oh, you're saying that if you know, let's say that you live in a simulation, then you would expect people to maybe all of a sudden shift the way that they would be going about their day to day. Is that what you're essentially saying?
Yeah, like it's like if you prove that this whole thing is, I guess you wouldn't be able to prove. You're just showing that there's a whole nother thing of something behind the veil, and
Well, we're
that
about to find
something.
out either way. We're about to find out either way. So, like, that's no longer the reason that this is available to know is because within literally the next year, the apparent will become apparent. So it's not really, it's not going to be behind closed doors for much longer. But so, first thing to point out is that the holographic universe and the simulation are two separate claims, and they're completely orthogonal to one another. Because something is simulated does not mean that it has to be holographic, and because something else is holographic does not mean it has to be simulated. It's just two completely different claims, and people sometimes confuse them. Holographic principle simply states that we are, from a physical perspective, a three-dimensional hologram projected from a two-dimensional filament outside of the universe. That's an idea in physics, but not a philosophical idea, and it has very strong promises at the moment in terms of theoretical physics. It's one of the most promising ways of seeing the world because it tracks a lot of things in a perfect way. And it was popularized by the physicist Leonard Susskind. That has, they can coexist, of course, but the simulation claim is different, which is that the world is computational, and in addition to that, it's being simulated on some external civilization's computer. That's essentially the other claim. But if you can simulate anything, you can simulate the universe as a hologram. You can simulate made out of marshmallows. You can simulate whatever you want. The reason I'm saying the holographic principle seems to be correct is because, well, I'm seeing it in the space, and the code seems to be kind of, it looks like like we are in a hologram essentially. And also, I think it lends itself really nicely to scientific investigation because there's quite a bit that we know about it from a theoretical standpoint mathematically, and we can start testing the claims because the holographic principle has particular box in which it's operating. And if you go outside of that box, well, that renders the idea false, which is nice because that you can basically test whether, we kind of belong in that schema or not. In terms of simulation, it doesn't really change much in the instant moment because either you're simulated by another civilization or simulated by the laws of physics, which you for sure are, right? It doesn't really change what you're doing every single day because you are within the pocket of reality that you're in and you're operating within these bounds. It's only if you have a day-to-day interaction with these higher spaces that it might start changing you emotionally. Understanding never comes linearly. It comes more like a long exposure to the stars. So like the more you expose the camera, the more information you're getting, but it's all together. It's not necessarily, oh, I understand this and now I understand that and now I understand that. It's not how it works. So because of that, unless you go there every day, like if you would have to leave our pocket of the simulation, go to the higher part of the simulation, interact with these species, which is what happens to you on DMT. If you do this a lot, then yeah, it starts kind of changing a little bit of the way that you would be doing things. Like, for example, maybe taking on board the ethical framework a little bit more seriously because there's some checks and balances that you might want to be aware of. But I don't actually think that that's the thing that's going to make people change their behavior. This is why, to me, it's much more of a kind of like a technical, scientific question. If we're talking about the human component of it, it's either going to have to wait a long period where these ideas will start translating to day-to-day things that we do or technologies that we build, and then the idea will become much more salient to more people, and then it will change the way that they're operating. Or people would have to literally, experience this on a regular basis, which is not for everybody, by the way. So then it might start changing you in some particular ways. But I think that's already happening. The reason that psychedelics are so effective in helping people with addictions and all of these things is because you're exposed to these deeper components of what reality really is. And the words we use, simulated, holographic, whatever, the words don't really matter. And I know you didn't mean it that way, but I do notice that sometimes people put too much stock into the words. They say, well, that can't be simulated. And I'm like, well, actually, it can't not be. But because it's simulated either way. Like either it's just your brain doing it, but it's a simulation. It's not what reality really is doing. But the word doesn't actually matter. If what people mean by the sentiment is that it's hard to accept the fact that we are not, we don't live on some like naturally occurring, blank canvas, but to some degree our reality is orchestrated by some other civilization. I think the thing that worries people about that is that what are their incentives? Why are they doing it? They immediately, which again is of course fear-based. So it's not understandable. Of course it is. But I think it's better to just stick with what you can influence. All of this stuff is fascinating, and this is why I'm trying to see if there's anything we can do with it so it becomes relevant. But really, you want to live the good life either way. If it's Jesus, if it's insectoid alien civilization, you want to live the good life, at least in the time that you have here. You want to, focus on the best possible experiences you possibly can have in the time that you get to have them.
Do you have a team of scientists now, physicists, people that are working together with you to do these experiments? Yeah.
Yes, yes, we have two physicists on board, and somebody who's a high level software engineer, and we have constantly people coming in. We have game developers. Laszlo is somebody who just stepped into the space and helps create some of these VR environments. And every day there's more and more people joining kind of the cause. And I'm truly, I feel blessed and kind of blown away by the caliber of people who just walked in. So we just did another appearance on the Danny Jones podcast, this time with Zoltan Bathory as well.
Mm,
He joined the board of directors. I officially started Code of Reality Inc. And our aim is to encourage a true scientific investigation of consciousness in a way that is, like an actual container, not just like a general kind of philosophical exploration, but like actual exploration. And so I'm very excited about things to come this year for sure.
nice. Do you work with Andrew Gallimore, or do you know him? Is that his name?
We actually, so with Gallimore, I don't know if you saw, but we had a little bit of a back and forth about the way that I'm going about everything. I met him in Japan 2 years ago. This point, I think, and or a year and a half ago. And since then, basically, we got connected. We spoke a little bit. He released this video, kind of talking about my project. Then I created a response video. Then we spoke on X about everything, and I think we kind of outlined our agreements and disagreements pretty clearly. And at this point, we have a pretty good relationship. He offered to help in terms of if I outlined particular parameters of the experiment and find the facilities and all that stuff, then Nunotics would help pay for at least the first round of the experimentation, which is wonderful and amazing. But outside of that, that's basically the extent of our current interaction. He's
Nice.
I think what he's doing is super important, and I really love his work. I drew a lot of inspiration and understanding from his work. And yeah, so that's the extent of the interaction with Galmo at the moment.
Nice. And I just wanted to ask you, you're doing
Can you
parkour
hear me?
and Ninja Warrior stuff still, or no?
No, no. It feels like a different lifetime. I do try and stay in shape. I recently started the last 5 months. I started running. I haven't really been running in a long time. I used to be into all kinds of powerlifting and even again I don't know if I would have like aimed towards bodybuilding, but it was pretty big. And I did some martial arts. I did some fighting. I did parkour. I was always very physically active. I did Ninja Warrior, but recently it's more, just I felt like I wanted to also feel naturally good inside. So I started running a lot, and I've been running 5 times a week. I'm now at about like at an average pace of like 6.1. So I'm running like 75 minutes every time, about 7+ miles, which is nice. I definitely feel a lot different in terms of, how I wake up in the morning, how I feel throughout the day, but
Nice.
nothing that explosive anymore. That
Cool.
I need to go through some corrections in the body to do these kind of things again.
Yeah,
You're
definitely.
obviously very physically active, right?
Yeah, I try to stay healthy. The older I get, the less you just change. You do different things to. I'm just trying to be healthy, functionally fit, pain-free, and mobile. You know what I mean? So I do
Yeah,
a lot of
mobility
movement.
is a huge one. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm big into
mobility is a
movement
huge
for
one.
sure.
Do you
But
put a
yeah,
lot of emphasis on that in your routines?
yeah, that's huge for me. I'm big on mobility and calisthenics and movement, yoga, mixing it all up and just trying to stay
Yoga. I
functionally
gotta do.
fit.
I used to do some yoga, and it was really enjoyable.
Yeah,
I need to do more of that. Yeah, yoga for sure is a big one. How old are you
yeah.
now?
43.
Okay, so you're even older than me. You look incredible for 43. So you should go
Well,
follow your
thanks.
regimens. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, dude. Well, I have an easy life. No kids. I don't have a wife, so I think I've just been blessed with like a very stress-free, fun life, and I get to do things like this as a hobby, where I learn and read and explore. So,
Is this something that? Sorry, I'm probing into your life like this, but is this something that? Hey, baby, you want the keys? My what? Oh, I got it. Everything is good. But um, is this something like you never wanted, like a wife and kids and like a family and all that stuff, or?
Well, I've always been open to the kid thing. People go, "You want kids?" It's like, well, who do you raise them with, And I've never met somebody that I was like, "Yep, that's a person I'm going to spend 20 years making a human with." So, if I was to meet that person, I'd be open to it, but I don't seek things as much as I just enjoy. I'm very grateful for the life that I'm given, the lot that I'm given, and if I'm supposed to share my life with somebody, I definitely will. And
Things will
if
happen.
I'm not, I'll be grateful for that as well.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I couldn't agree more. There's this actually really um, there's a I guess it gives me inspiration for love in general. I have a friend who I recently, well, I befriend. So um, I don't know if you know, but Israel had was so Yigal Ravid is somebody who's basically he was the voice of Israel. He's like I grew up hearing his voice on the radio. Like he is this one of these like iconic voices, right? When I came to LA through this project, I got to know him. He lives here, and he met his now husband in at Burning Man at 63 when he was already 63. And here's the crazy part: his now husband was not only he was never with a man before, he was married to a woman, and he's this young therapist, like somebody who's like has an incredible job. It's not like you would find these reasons for like he was searching something outside the box because it was like lost. And they have the most romantic like relationship I've ever seen. And I was like, wow,
hmm,
that it's like it really if you want to stick the sticker on love has no boundaries on anything, it would be there. I was like, wow, this is
yeah.
just like I don't know. I was like, wait, did you ever when I spoke to, like obviously we're friends, or like I when I would ask his now husband, I was like, do you, because I was just fascinated. I was like, did you like never like you never felt like participants? She's like, no, I just fell in love with the person. Like I
Hmm.
don't. There's just no like it actually didn't matter whatsoever, because some people just know, right? Some people are either this or that, and it's very clear to them. And I'm like, was it like he's like, I don't even see it in terms of a spectrum. I just it's just love. Like I
Hmm.
just love that person. And they recently were talking about like, having a kid and all of that stuff. And it really opened my mind to the understanding that there is this more infinite channel that we all kind of aligning ourselves around it. And some of us allowing more of it into our lives and some of us don't. And I know because when I met my now fiance, I was completely I was completely set with just being alone for the rest of my life.
Hmm.
Like obviously I know I would, see people and all that stuff, but like I was like, like I'm good. Like I feel really, really content. And that's when she walked into my life. So I completely understand that state of mind where you're just like, I'm good. Like I have everything I need, and if it happens,
Yeah.
great, and if it doesn't, that's totally fine. I
Yeah.
was exactly there. Yeah,
It's a
I
nice
guess
place to be because you're never feeling lack. You're just grateful for life. And if you love life itself, it's pretty hard to have a bad day. If you really appreciate it at the core, you're not just saying it. But I really do. I'm very intrigued by life. I think it's a mystery and it's beautiful to be a part of it. And I can tell you do too.
I think it's meaning. I think what really souls seek for is meaning. That's the food of the soul is meaning. And if you think about it, meaning is a tricky word because what do you mean by the word meaning, right? That's why it's a tricky word. But it's like it's the essence of the the interaction with existence, I think. And it's when we eat good food, it's meaningful. Like it's like the wanting to go get it, the occupy, like same goes for sex or any other pleasure of the body, right? But even beyond that, like if spiritual pursuit, yes, it's true that you want to de-emphasize the attachment to all kinds of things, but still the sense of meaning is there. So it's like it's always meaning. That's the thing that we. So if you found, and not just you, I'm talking in general, of course. Like if we found that full container in which we have all the healthy amount of meaning that we need to derive throughout the day, I mean, you're set. And
Mm-hmm.
again, with your job, I think that there's something to be said about the fact that, as cliche as that sounds, it's true. There's something about jobs like yours, firefighters, nurses. Yes, I know it's a cliche at this point, but it's true. There's something about the fact that you know you're doing something good. Like, yes, it's a job and you get paid, but you know it's a good, like, there's a wholesome component to it. You're helping others with it. And that is a very big source of meaning. I think the meaning is the connection to the rest and the fact that you know that you're, even though you're saying it's mostly just, which I'm sure you're de-emphasizing a lot here, because I'm pretty sure that you guys get into pretty dangerous situations as well quite often. But still, like there's even if it's just going and making sure that a homeless guy is okay or didn't get a heart attack, still there's a mission there. There's a
Yeah.
would you not agree with that? That
Yeah, and then at the core, I think too, like you don't, I've seen a lot of people identify with positions or jobs and things like that, which can also create suffering. But meaning in itself is the thing that is the essence, because Viktor Frankl and different people have helped me to realize that we're little meaning making machines. We use language and storytelling to define our reality, and we've been handed a lot of meaning, and then we have to unpack that and go, okay, what meaning am I giving to each circumstance? And I'm really big on that. I'm big on my relationship to my experiences and choosing them wisely, trying to find the most truthful and advantageous, meaningful life that I can have, or way of relating to each experience. You can flip it, and in one you're getting a low vibrational state which creates suffering and dis-ease, and you flip it another way and you're like, oh my god, I'm actually lucky to be in that circumstance. And there's infinite examples that I've been through, and I'm sure you have, where you're like, oh, just the little flip of your narrative creates a whole physiological response, which then creates a whole feedback loop for the further interactions going forth. So I'm really big on meaning making.
Yeah, it's about staying. This is why I always keep advocating for equanimity, because from it, anything that is required will arise. And if most of the time you exist in the pure state of like equanimity and bliss, love will naturally arise. But at the proper moment, also the boundary making will arise when it's proper, which because sometimes it is proper, right? And that's the beauty of that state and aiming towards that state, because the true understanding what is and what needs to be becomes so apparent, and there's something very meaningful about that. There's like everything is just so. Everything is in the
Mm-hmm.
right place. There's nowhere that you really need to be. It's just complete content, and the ultimate state of content, I guess, is what I think equanimity is, or I don't know, nirvana. I guess it's the kind of like the ultimate fractal of that, of
Mm-hmm.
that emotions, the way it unfolds. Have you ever gotten into the gene keys? Have you ever?
Dude, it's so funny. You're like the 10th person in 1 month, I swear, that's been talking about gene keys to me.
Mhm.
Um, I'm trying to think who recently really brought it up hard. Oh, I just interviewed a guy, and he was an anesthesiologist and really neat. Madhava Sethi is his name, and he's really big into it and read all the books, and he's able to articulate it very well. I'll send you the podcast. It's actually really good the way he breaks it down. I think it was with Alexis Cohen. She's a pretty
Mm.
fascinating lady, but yeah. So I've been getting into it recently. I'm a projector.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Remind me what is the? I'm definitely not an expert. I'm just
Okay, well, me
yeah,
neither. I literally just finally looked up my own like 2 nights ago because
yeah,
this is all fresh to me. And I think I heard of it 2 summers ago and I was like, some channel. But
same
then I'm
thing.
like, everything's channel. I just don't identify it as such. I
Yeah,
think we're always in different channels all the time. And it's like, what are we serving?
but was your map pretty accurate to you, or it was kind of like, meh,
It didn't like make me go, shit, I got to hurry up and buy all these books and go make it my
got it,
thing. No
got it, got
way.
it. Okay,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
nor would I, because I'm always like, it's just an interpretation.
Of
And that's
course,
all,
totally.
that's all things and all, reality are just human interpretation. So I never take it as any kind of source code.
Yeah. No, I think all of these are heuristics. Obviously, the real thing is truly unspeakable. I think
Mm-hmm.
the reason that I asked is because there's something about the finding the full equilibrium and to traveling through the shadows to the gift to the city that I do find actually a helpful frame, which is like because all these faults they're basically natural predispensations that you have to enter through, and then you get to transform them into the gift, and you get to
Mm.
transform them into the city. Mine was eerie, to be quite honest. Mine was like eerily accurate, which was kind of like one of these like blew my mind.
What is yours?
Uh, no, the specifics. I mean, I'm just a generator, which is I think most
Okay.
people. Yeah, I think most people are. But it was the specifics of the exact map that kind of was like, whoa, that's kind of wild. Um,
Interesting.
but the reason I got into it is because I actually heard, just like you, many people mentioned it to me, and for the most part, I just ignored it because people mention all kinds of things,
Yeah.
and for the most part, I'm very skeptical. And usually, people the thing that they think will blow your mind does usually doesn't, and then it's like you know. But then somebody sent me Rick Rubin's podcast episode with the writer, with the creator of the Jinkies,
Mm.
Richard Wad. And actually, the that podcast got me because I listened to him talk, and I was like, oh, he's just so he's very similar to like how I think. Like he's very straightforward. There's no like none of that woo woo stuff. And I was like, okay, oh,
All
well,
right.
I'll check it out. And then
Yeah.
I went to Audible. We have the big book because somebody gifted it to us, and I forgot about it. But then I spent a lot of time on the road, so I was like, well, I'll just get the Audible version. And all of a sudden, it was free. So I was like, okay, well, I guess that's a sign. So I started listening to it, and it started making a lot of sense to me. And you're right. Obviously, in the end of the day, these are all interpretations. But there's something about that particular interpretation that makes it easier for me to kind of frame things. Because for
Mm-hmm.
me, one of the biggest things is I am a very harsh critic of me, which sometimes might surprise people because it sounds like I'm very self-assured and all kinds of, but that's because I already gave myself all the hard time that you can possibly, way more than anyone ever could. And
Mm-hmm.
when I arrive at a certain thing, I already kind of, I graduate, right? That's what I meant by that place that graduates in me. And because of that, certain things sometimes are very heavy, like certain responsibilities, and some, it's not always clear what's the correct way to proceed. And there was something truly profound and universal, specifically about the gene keys, that I found very correct,
Hmm.
because it applies to real things. Like one thing that really resonated with me was, I'll probably butcher it because I only went through this once, so somebody will like be very upset at me right now. But the I think it was the shadow is of that gene key is judgment, but the gift is discernment, which I found very interesting. And if I remember correctly, which is I don't probably, but the city is always surprising. I think the city in that one was leadership. We could probably look it up in a second, but it doesn't matter. But there was some surprising element to the city there, and I found this so true. That the difference between judging something, which always has this component of like, I know what's wrong with it. There's always this like, ah, if I have the opportunity, I'm gonna let it know. Let them know. And then you move when you, I guess, rise in vibration. You move to this more like, well, you actually write about what's wrong with it. What is incorrect is the attitude of the proving it wrong versus helping remedy whatever it needs to be. So it's like that's
Mm.
a very different attitude, just like which is the more like the wise father, just kind of allowing things until you get to steer them naturally versus trying to impose what you believe is correct, right? And that kind of almost like Tai Chi way of trying to like this, like you going with the motion, the way of the Tao, that I found very helpful. Try and apply it more and more, and I don't always succeed.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously days in which it's kind of like you feel more of the combative nature, and other days in which you feel softer and more. And I love the fact that it's constantly a game, and it's a game in which we agree on some things and we help each other kind of, or hopefully help each other grow through these processes. And whenever I meet someone like you who clearly, truly have achieved this state where you like really everything is well and everything is in its place, I know that there had to be some process of these little turns that both experientially and theoretically, and they all kind of came together. And it always fascinates me. That's why I asked you,
Mm.
because I had a lot of conversations in the last week of the flavor around this, like what happens to a person in their life where they get to a place kind of like what you're describing, because that's I'm sure you know that that's actually a rarity. Like it doesn't happen very often to people, and I see that you feel very blessed to have that, and you're like very grateful for that. And if there's anything that I can always distill in somebody's life about that, I'm always trying to find that in the person, so maybe can like help communicate to other people.
Yeah.
So that's a very long route of really asking you: do you feel that you had this predisposition of this like kind of like wise way of looking at life, or obviously when you got into your 30s and then 40s, you started really aiming there more, like consciously aiming there?
Yeah. It's funny to be on the other end on my own podcast, but I am thinking about, I appreciate that, by the
Yeah.
way. Um, I've thought about this a lot because if there is suffering, which there is in everyone's life to some degree, mine comes from the fact that I'm lucky and other people are not doing so well a lot, right? There's suffering in that. And if I'm laying in bed at night and I'm buzzing, vibrating like I am, I truly am, and I know that, and I'm always like sending it out to as many people as I can, starting with people like my sister, my mother, my friends, and I always love to send high vibration love to people in the state that I'm in. I always wish it for all these people. And then I feel like, okay, well, what are you doing to help people feel better, right? And yeah, firefighting is one way that's been a blessing in my life to give me actually food, shelter, water, hierarchy of needs, time, purpose, all these things that you couldn't imagine. But way before that, when you look at it, like I've laid in thousands of hours maybe now at this point of float tanks and spent plenty of time sitting alone because I really enjoy contemplation and because it's infinite. Like I love curiosity inward like you do. And you go back through time, I was adopted and so was my sister from two different biological families, but we were raised in the same household. And I've always been deeply curious about nature nurture. And is it the environment or is it genes? And you come through with like karmic, whatever, essence and archetypes. And maybe it's just old. People call you an old soul or something. You're like, yeah, but we're all old souls to some degree and we just don't know. So as a child, though, I do remember feeling lucky and it was so I don't take responsibility too often for my life. I'll take responsibility for certain elements of it, but once you look at it deep enough, you're like, geez, there's so much of you that's just happening, right? And I can't take credit for it. And a lot of what helps me not to treat other people as why don't they just do this or take responsibility, that actually minimizes suffering too when you start to realize you didn't do much. You're lucky. You should be grateful for the fact that you had the right genes, the right hardware, you weren't crippled, you didn't have abuse, you didn't have you can go on forever and be grateful, and that actually amplifies your state just by taking account for what's going right that you didn't do. It just for some circumstance you're doing better and someone else was born and thrown into a dumpster and molested and thrown into all these horrible traumatic circumstances plus the lineage behind them. So I'm at least aware enough to know that there's suffering and then there's the opposite of that. And I double down on the thing that keeps me from suffering, taking account for what's going right, feeling grateful for that, and then looking for things that I can triage in my environment to go, where do we start to minimize suffering for everyone else? And so I love sharing breath work with people. And I love helping them connect with the essence of the fact that they can control their nervous systems with the breath. They can be more present with the breath. They can learn to be more lucid in their experience with the breath. It doesn't matter what religion you are, what your belief systems are, it transcends all ideology because if you tap into that powerful thing, It can help you to see your environment better. It can help you feel your inner experience better. So I found the breath to be number one in the thing that I can help with people. And so that's become a big part of my life that I share with people is
What
breath
kind of
work.
breath work do you usually recommend to people, or all kinds?
I don't recommend anything. I help people to realize that there's a relationship, like you said there, and I think of cultivating that relationship. So when people come to one of my workshops, I give them a recipe that's a lot of slowing down and then a little bit of other cadence and different techniques that I've learned from different books and workshops and all these things, but I've packaged it in a way to where they feel the power of the breath, both inducing stress and then learning how to calm it in more like an exposure therapeutic way. And anyway, it helps people to know that there's even something there to cultivate in the first place. And then
That
they
they
can
didn't
go
even
and
use.
each person then goes and explores. It's almost like telling someone to read a book would be a bad idea, but telling them why they would read in the first place would be like lighting the fire, which inspires a reader.
And also to read the books that they want to read. Yeah,
Exactly, because each person
yeah,
should read different books and then we can all compare cliff notes.
yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, that's a long answer, but sort of
Oh
that's
no,
where I'm at.
thank you for sharing that. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That see, if more people would just be focused on that, it will literally transform everything, right? Because it's maybe it sounds like a dirty example, but it drives the point home. Have you ever seen anybody on MDMA complaining? It's just it's unfathomable, right? It's like nobody's like hating on anyone else when they're feeling amazing.
But the
And the
next
point,
day.
sure,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
why that's a dirty example. But the
Hmm.
point is that when you feel amazing, you have no room of talking about all these like who's trying to get you and like you don't care. It's like so. If imagine if you can be more often in the state of bliss, it will literally transform everything. So it starts with bringing down, like I said, calming down, not like really not feeling the fight or flight of the nervous system on a regular basis,
Mm,
and that helps kind of like putting the it really creates a hierarchy of it reveals the hierarchy of needs in a much clearer way,
mm,
where maybe right now, spending 2 hours talking to a family member about what they don't know about the secret plans that the government have to like, okay, but like, did it make your day better? No, you would have been so much better if you would just sit there together and just share the space and have some tea and talk about your past together, like that kind of stuff. That would actually
hmm.
move the dial because that now you both feel a certain way. Now your kids are going to feel that from you. They're going to grow up in an environment that has more of that. They're going to be less stressed and less angry. They're going to tell less of these stories, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be the people of the future. So there's really like it's so clear when you just bring it
Yeah,
down that the immediate creates the ultimate, and then from that place exploring the ultimate even from a intellectual entertainment, that's also great. But as long as it's expressed in this the anticipation of the beauty of the future versus all the things that might go wrong. Because sure, of course, it can go wrong. It will for sure. It's constantly happening. It's what it is. When it will happen, you'll deal with it, and guess what? It will not be nearly as bad as what you thought it would be.
hmm,
And we understand this, but then as a civilization, it's almost like we have yet to learn that lesson as a civilization together. That's the thing that I think we need to put more emphasis on. And
yeah,
it's interesting because there is some content out there that starts to kind of produce this kind of conversation. Um, what's his name? Uh, Grant? Is it Robert? Robert Grant? Um, yeah, there's like the whole Gaia, like all that stuff. But it also to some degree sometimes becoming a little cultish, right?
yeah,
So I wish it would just be like a mainstream thing where more people, more Danny Joneses would have more guests. Like I try to encourage him like to have more guests like I really want him to interview Michael Levine. You know Michael Levine, the biologist.
Yep.
So
That
I
would
would
be
love to
awesome.
see that conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because he's so like, but he's an enlightened being. He might not think about it like that, but he's changing the world, and he's very much understanding of what these things are really at bottom. But he's coming at it from a very scientific perspective. But that is the kinds of interactions I want to see more of.
Yeah.
Less what's wrong and more like how can we make this amazing thing together.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm trying to do that a little bit with this tiny little show that's new to me, but I love just inspiring curiosity because if you're curious, worlds open up to you that you didn't know existed, and each person has their own inclination towards what they would seek, once they start to just ignite that fire in them. And so, anyway, I like to just think of be contagious in the way that you know best, because everything's contagious. We're always contagious in a negative or positive way. And yeah, I just have to realize that the environment itself is quite weird and it's only going to get weirder. And so invite it in, like you said, with curiosity and wonder and gratitude. And man, it's so much easier than worrying. So yeah,
Much
it's
more
really,
pleasant, that's for sure.
yeah,
I spend my whole life being worried about everything, and I'm just no more. Like I have no more left in me to be worried about anything. If it happens, hey, it's fine. Like
yeah,
it's what it, I don't know if you heard me ever give this example, but because I truly envision this, right? What is the end goal of these attitudes? Which is like the people that always warn you about, whatever it is. So how I always say, like, how good do you think it would really feel if, let's say, you were the one warning everybody for nuclear, war or whatever? How good would it really feel in that instance where you might be around somebody who you kept on telling them that when the mushroom cloud goes off? Do you really think it was worth it for that one instance where you go, see? Like, okay, but you made everybody and yourself miserable the whole time. Like,
mm,
it's gonna happen, man. Like, it's what are you gonna do? Put sunglasses on, sit on a chair and relax. Like, it's gonna be. But so in the time that you do have without that, just you can go to the store, you can cook something beautiful, you can invite somebody you love, you can cook for them. Do that.
yeah.
Isn't it a much better was spent your time spent?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I always ask my people on the show if you were going to die today, what would you want to share with the world? And especially if you hadn't already been on all the Danny Jones and you hadn't been interviewed, but I'm just saying right now, this was the last thing you could say.
I love you. If you can say that to somebody and truly mean it, you're in good shape.
I love it, man. You're awesome. It was fun chatting with you and exploring these ideas, and I bet we would have a good time doing that in person someday. So I'll make sure to make it out to LA when you bounce
Yeah,
back.
yeah. Or when I'm in Arizona. So
Yeah, maybe you'll be out here. We'll go for a hike or something.
you're awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.